And when you call this session underscore start for the first time, the session underscore start function first checks whether the client already has a session ID assigned to it. If the client does not have a session, then it generates a session and gives that session to the client. If the client already has a session, then it uses the session. And the session ID is a 32 character or a string of length 32 characters, and usually it is a random number which is unique per client. Let's look at how the things are working. So whenever any client that comes visits your site, you start a session, you give the session ID to the client. At the same time, you create an allocation for the client on your server. Whatever state of the client that you want to store within your program, you store those information. For example, you may store the information when the client has started this session, maybe some count or some value or some order that the client has placed, anything that is relevant for a particular session, that information is stored. Because the session ID is sent in the form of a cookie, whenever the client makes a subsequent request, every time the request is made by the client, this session ID will be transferred back to you. So, whenever a request is made, we first check what is the ID of the client, and then if you want to store some information about this particular client, we use that ID as our reference, and the relevant information regarding that session will be stored over here. And you will notice that you can have many such session open with different clients. So every client is identified by a session ID. When the ID changes, we store that information, whatever that is required by us, in the corresponding allocation that is given for the given client. Now in the PHP, there is a INI file, and I think I have already shown you that INI file. So let me open this Notepad+, which shows it much easily or in a much readable format. Let me go to this exam folder, and let me go to the PHP part of it, and you have a file called php.ini. I'm going to just open that file in the Notepad so that it is readable. So Notepad+ will show the things in a readable way. Now you notice over here there is a semicolon in front of it. The semicolon indicates that it is remarked. So if there is no semicolon when the starting of the line, that means this particular setting is active. So if you notice over here, so Y2K compliance on. So if you put a semicolon here, that means it is off. This is remarked out. So this particular setting is on. We are interested in the session related thing. So I'm going to just search for the word session. You notice here there is a section called as session, okay? And you have all the details regarding it. The top side says what does that particular setting means, and if you want to know more details about it, they are giving you a reference for the php.net website wherein you can get the detail. Now if you go down over here, you will notice that it says session.save.path, session.save underscore path is exam10. So this is the place where the server is supposed to store the session information. Now when the client goes over here and when the client makes a request, we store the session information of the client in a temporary location, and this setting that is given by the INI file says which is the location on the server where the session information need to be stored. So here it says it is C:\exam temp. It could be somewhere else. So if you go to this particular location, so if I go to the C:\exam and then temp, this is the place where the session information will be stored. Okay, so if this configuration says the PHP is supposed to store the information over here, and you notice that already some files are already existing, and per session, and this is the session ID or the session number, it creates one file. So in other words, per user, it's going to create one file. So when I create a session, depending upon the path that is specified over here, one file is automatically created by the PHP. This file will be there until you destroy the session and until you say to the PHP that this session needs to be destroyed. That file contains all the relevant information regarding that user. Whatever information that you want to store regarding this particular user in a given session, that information will be available. Remember, whenever there is an interaction or whenever there is a session with the user, we don't store each and everything. Everything is not important to us. There are few related information or there are few required state that need to be stored. For example, I need to know who has logged in, or I need to know what items the user has already purchased, or I need to know what is the credit card of the user. This kind of information are stored here. I don't need to know whether the person has clicked on this button or that button and so on and so forth. All of them really doesn't make a lot of difference in the maintaining the state of the session. So let's look at this one in action. So I have the PHP running here, and I have created a session here by calling this session underscore start, and then I'm going to get a new number here by closing this particular browser. So if I close this browser, it will not reuse the yesterday's session, it will recreate a session. So I'm going to close this browser so that when I run it, I'm going to get a new number. So now I'm going to run this particular thing. This is the same example that I'm using from the yesterday's class. So when I try to run this application, I'm going to get a session ID, and there will be a file corresponding to that particular ID. So when the browser starts, you will notice that I have a ID that is generated, and then if I go to the temporary location, I can find the same ID. So I got one ID over here. Now if I go to the temp here, this location can be changed depending upon the situation. So I think this is the one that so you will notice that there is a file corresponding to the number that is generated. So this is SES and so on and so forth. That's the same number. So this is automatically created by the PHP. Now whatever information that I want to store regarding this person, or whatever state of the client that I want to store for this particular ID, will be stored in this file. What's the advantage of using the file is if the power fails on the server and if the server crashes altogether, the session information will be still there because the session is not written on the RAM, rather it is written on the file. So if you start, for some reason, if you switch off the Apache and restart it all over again, the session will be still be there, and whatever state that you have stored regarding a client will still be there with us. So let's look at putting something in the client side. The way in which I assign the values to the session is very simple. We have a global array, and within that global array, I'm going to say $session and then I think it's not helping me out. Okay. And whatever I want to store, I can store it. For example, if I say username is something, and if I say order number, so I do that thing, this information is stored. Now I will just run this one. So I want to store this information for the user. So if I run this application, or if I just say F5 on this one, now when I F5, it just means to say that the script got executed. Now if I go to that file here and then open this file in the Notepad or Notepad plus whatever you like, because I'm using this because it is easier to see the content. You notice that it has stored that information. Username is a string of length 4 characters and the actual value, followed by a semicolon. Order number is a integer and the value. So it's going to store the value in a continuous line with a semicolon separation. So this is the information that it has stored. Now what if I try to change this particular value? If I change this to say Mangalore or something, and then I need to run it. So if I recall this script again, you will notice that if I go back and if I say reload it, it's going to show me the new value. So you will notice that it is possible for us to change the value. Now what if I close this particular client? Now when I close this one, the session is closed on the client side. The browser is your client. So the session is closed. What will happen to this particular file? So if you refresh it again, let me apply on this one. So it is still there. Okay. The client has closed it, but it is still there. The session information is still there. What does that mean is it's going to retain this particular value, and if the client goes out because of some reason, if there is an interruption in the internet connection or something happens, client has is gone out, then you have lost the information of the client. So when the client comes over again, you're going to give them a new ID. So if I go over here and if I rerun this particular script, the client is going to get a new ID altogether, and I have lost track of the client, and this information or this state of the client that I wanted to store is gone altogether. Why this thing happens is because I am asking the browser to store the session ID in the RAM. So it is storing that session ID, this information or the cookie corresponding to this information is there on the RAM. So when I close this browser, the application closes, whatever that is there on the RAM closes. I can anytime ask the browser to store this information permanently on the hard disk, so that when it comes back, I can retain that value back. So I can manipulate the setting and I can do it. So instead of asking it to store the cookie in the memory, that is the live cookie, I can tell the browser that you store it in the hard disk. Next time if you are coming back, read it from the hard disk and then get it back. So that is how you will notice that sometime if you log on to the Gmail or other thing, and if you ask the Gmail, keep me logged in for the next 5 days, 10 days or anything, automatically when you go back to the same site, it will log you on and it will show you an inbox. This happens because the cookie is not stored in the memory or in the RAM, rather it is stored in the hard disk. So how am I going to do that thing? We will look at it in the other slides. So let's go back to the slides and let's look at the details. So now you know very well that whenever a client comes to you, you create a session ID, you supply that session ID to the client comes back to you and they will bring back the session ID to you, and then for any subsequent request, you are going to store that information. Now you may say that, okay, this is not the information that the client has given. This is what you are typing. As a programmer, you have typed something and you are saying that this is the client information. I have not created, I don't want to waste too much of time in the theory classes. I would have had a form in this page with asking the users for some details, and I would have taken all these details from the user and I would have stored it in the session. In that case, the user information, the live information would have been there in the session there. As of now, this is just a theory class, so I don't want to waste too much of time on that. So you can get the values from the user like the name, the address or the order number, everything, and then store them using your program into the session variable. Later you can retrieve it. Now this is the way in which you store the information regarding the user. Now, so this is if you are doing it in the other way around, so you have a value and you are trying to store it in the session. How do I retrieve it from? Retrieving it is in the other way around. So suppose if you have a session here, and let me say, suppose this value is already there in the session, how do I retrieve this value? To retrieve this value, you have to do it in the other way around. You have to just say that a session followed by the values that are, or the key that is stored in the session. Remember, this part is the key. So this is the key, and this will be the value. So you have key value pair. So if you assign the value to the key, the value is stored. If you just request for the key itself, the value will be retrieved, whatever value is stored, and it is going to be given back to you. So if I run this application, I'm going to say the value that was stored here. This up to here is the ID of the user. Because I have not used the line break there, you're going to get the value. So this is how you put the value, you get the value back. So suppose if I go to the temp here, and if I search for the ID that corresponds to this particular user, and if I search a bit, I'm going to get that ID. I think this is 7J7. I'm going to just retrieve that 7J7 here, and the same thing will be there because I'm running the same script. Only thing that has changed is the ID of the user. Now, what will happen if you, or what will you do if you want to delete something from this location? In order to remove something from the session, you can use the unset. So you can use this unset here. So you can say unset and then specify what you want to remove from the session. So if you say unset followed by this, that means it's going to remove the username information, username key from the session. From now onwards, that will not be there. Suppose if I refresh it here now, remember, according to the script, it will first read that thing, it will read the username, and then it will withdraw that thing from this session. So what you notice here is it has read the value, then onwards it has deleted it. Now if I go to this particular file and reload it, you will notice that that thing is gone. So this is how you remove the content from this session. You can set the value, you can get the value, you can delete the value from the session depending upon the situation. Now if I rerun this again, I'm going to get an error message. So if I refresh it again, if I go over and refresh it again, it should not have given me the value. So it is not there. I think it will be there. The reason is when I refresh it, this will be there already. So if I just uncomment, if I comment this one, so that it will retain the value. So otherwise, what will happen is it will put it back, read it again and again. So now if I try to run this one, and then if I saved it, I'm going to get it. This didn't allow me to save. If I save it, it's going to come back. There is some problem with the NetBeans. But anyway, I think you'll be able to get that idea. So in the previous case, it was not giving me an error message because now if I do it, it's going to read it from this session and it's going to say that that index username is undefined. It's gone, it is deleted it, and again you will not be able to get it. So let me go ahead with the slide now. I'll quickly go through it. So in the INI you will find few things. One of them is the path where you want to store the file. The next one is the session use cookie equal to 1. What's the meaning of saying this is the INI file that I'm trying to show you. This is the php.ini, not this one. Okay, I'm showing you all the content, so you have it here. What's the meaning of saying use cookie equal to 1 means by default use the cookie to store the session. If you say this as 0, that means you are telling the PHP that do not create a session, I will use the other option. Okay. Let me quickly go through all the other one. And the next one is of interest to us is the name of the cookie that is being specified. By default, the name is PHP session ID. If you want to change the name of this particular cookie, you can change it. Now, if you go to this browser and if you look at the cookie that was given to you by the PHP, you will notice that you will find that the cookie is given a name as session ID. If you don't want that ID for the cookie, you can change the ID in the php.ini and you can tell the PHP that you change the ID and use something else like SID or some other short form. However, this must be a alphanumerical value and it must start with a letter. It cannot start with a number. You can give the name as 1, 2, 3 as the session ID. Remember, this is the key again. This value that you see over here is the key, it's not the value. So here, if you look at the browser, this is the key, value is the content. So it's like a variable name. That value for the S session PHP sess ID, the value will be the random number, whereas this is just the name. If you want to change the name, like it is as good as saying if you want to change the name of the variable, you go to the php.ini and make the changes. If you feel like doing it, you do it, otherwise it's not really required. So let's see how the session can be created. In order to use the session, you have to start the session, register the session variable that you want to maintain, use the session variable, and finally deregister them from or destroy them. I'll quickly go through it. So how do you start the session? Use the session underscore start. It will check whether the session already exists. If the session already exists, it uses it. If it is no, it's going to create a session ID. Now, how do I get the name and ID of the session? If you want to use the name and ID of the session, you have a built-in functionality that is associated with the PHP. To get the ID, you have this one. There is one more function called as session underscore name. This is going to give you the name of the session. So in your case, the session name was PHP ID. So I'm going to uncomment this one so that I won't get the error. Let me go over and run it again, and you will notice that it will come in one line. I have not put the line break there, and you will notice that this is the ID. Up to here is the ID. Then the next part is the name, that's the name that you have given, and after this is the value that I'm trying to store. If I use the line break, it's going to come in one line. I'm not going to waste my time on. I think I can do that thing. This is not going to work because so if you want it to in one line, you can do that thing. So it's going to come in this one. Now if you want to change the name of the variable, you can give the new name. So if this is the old name, if you want to give a new name to this, you can do that thing. However, you must understand that by default, whenever it calls this session start, it will automatically default back to the whatever value which was there in the php.ini. So if you change the name here, when the script ends, automatically it will revert back to the PHP session ID. So if you want the permanent changes, you will have to go here and then make the changes. So go and make the changes here. If you make the changes in the php.ini, this will be permanently available. If you are using this function, every time whenever you are trying to do that thing, you will have to, before calling the PHP session start, you will have to do this thing. So how am I going to do it? I'm going to say session underscore name and then specify the name. Okay. So I'm trying to change the name. In this case, what is going to happen? Now if I run it now, and you will notice that the session name has changed. However, this change will be in effect only until the script is active. Whenever the script goes out of scope, or that means to say that in other page, if you again call session.start, it will revert back to the PHP ID. So if you are changing it manually on every page, before you start the session, say to it that this name is there right before calling the session start. If you call the session start, it will revert back to the name that was there in the php.ini, and it will use that name from that point onwards. Now if you look at the cookie here, again if you go back and look at the cookie here, you notice that the previous cookie is still there, it is there, but this, if you look at this one, it is 777 something was there. This is the new ID that I have told, and I am getting a new ID altogether. So this is the ID that I am getting because I changed the name. So when the name was changed, it went and asked the browser, do you have a cookie with the name money ID? But the browser said, I have a cookie called as PHP session ID. Then it said, that's not the one. I want this cookie. If you have it, if you don't have it, I'm going to give you a new number. Then the browser said, I don't have this one. So it gave the new number, even though the previous ID was there. So if you are changing the session ID, the advisable thing is do it in the php.ini, not in the script, because by mistake, if you miss out this line for some reason, if you miss out that line, your program will start behaving in a very strange way, because after that point, that ID will be different. The browser will start giving back a different ID, and you'll end up in a mess. So it is always a good thing to go to the php.ini to make changes. So this is the function. session name and specify the name. When you specify a new name, it will actually return the old name back to you. It will tell you what was the old name. So the return value of this function is the old name, and it's going to set the new name. In my case, I try to set this one as money ID. So I told this is money ID. What is returned when I do that thing is it's going to return this PHP SC, I think, sys ID. So it's going to return this one, which was this old value. So it's going to return an old value and it's going to accept the new value. So this is one example wherein I have set that thing. So I'm setting it to my session and then I'm printing. This is the before setting. This is after setting. But always remember, you try to do this kind of thing. Again, the session starts back. It will revert back to its previous value. This is how you set the value. I think it's not a new thing. You have a key, assign the value. In olden days, people used to set the value using the session underscore register. This it has been deprecated from the 4.1 onwards. So suppose if you read a book and in that book, if they are saying that session underscore register, please stop reading that book because it is an outdated book altogether. Okay. So this is the new way. They have pulled out this method. What's the meaning of saying deprecated? Deprecated is a warning to the developers saying that do not use this method. Today we are supporting it. In future we will withdraw that method from the PHP altogether and your program is going to crash on that day. So deprecated does not mean that it has been deleted from the PHP. It is still there for the backward compatibility. So if you have written an old program that was prior to 4.1, the program is still going to work fine. But if you are writing a program today, you are writing a new program, then do not venture into this method. That method is marked as a deletion, mark for the deletion. So in future they may pull up. And this is true in almost all programming language. And if you are using the IDEs like NetBeans or the Eclipse, when you try to use a deprecated method, it actually strikes it off. So for example, this is NetBeans will do it only on the Java deprecated method. It will strike off this method as you start typing it. After that, it will put a dash line for that. If that dash line is just an indication to you saying that that method is deprecated, try to go for a newer method. This is just the program will work fine, but it is just an indication to you saying that that method is gone. They have pulled out this from the library. Try to use a newer version. I'll quickly complete this one. This is to do it. How do I unset a variable? Unset, give a variable. Now, if you want to remove all of them, remember it's an array. If you want to pull out everything, you just assign a blank array to it. So it's a key value pair. It's just an array which is there. If you want to remove entire state of the user, just assign a blank array to it. So all the values will be truncated. And if you want to delete the entire session altogether, call session underscore destroy. This will destroy that file altogether, but it will not destroy the cookie that was sent to the user. The user will still have the cookie. Cookie is not destroyed, but it will delete this file. So I have shown you that there is a file here. For every user, it's going to create a file. When you call session.destroy, it will just go and wipe out that file from the hard disk. From that point onwards, you will